Welcome back to Sika Strength. Welcome back to Sika Stan. My name is Owen, and today we're doing Q&A episode based on some questions from last week. So if you want to ask a question, there'll be a pinned comment below. Go down to the comment section and leave your question. It can be on absolutely anything we do: weightlifting, powerlifting, general strength training, strength conditioning, sports, anything like that you've seen us cover. Please feel free to go ahead and leave a comment there. No matter how basic it seems, how specific it is, do leave the comments, and we're happy to get to as many as is feasible. So there's a lot of great questions last week. Dara will be back joining us with this one next week. He just needs a little bit more time off. He needs a break. So based on your recent front squat video, how would you program the front squat differently to the back squat? Now, look, not to start off the episode with an ad. Actually, it's probably better to start off with an ad. We're writing a front squat program for the app. But when it comes to front squats and back squats, you're making predictions based off a few things. First of all, you're making the allowance that you have that sufficient back squat at the moment. So like we talked about in that video of the front squatting advice, you're looking at making sure that you're strong enough so you don't necessarily need to do a crazy amount of front squatting for a little progress. But if we compare just sets for reps in the back squat versus the front squat, generally we're just not going to do those heavier high rep front squat sets. We might do some lighter volume. We might even stray into the 6s or 8s region. But in general, as you alluded to in your question, your upper back position gets lost quite quickly, no matter how good at front squatting you are, no matter how strong your upper back is, no matter how good your mobility is. You're probably going to end up losing your upper back. You know, if you're doing 3 or 4 sets of 10, and even in one session, you're probably going to lose your upper back position. But if we do 2, 3, 4 weeks of some pretty high volume, like we might do in the back squat, by that 4th week of 10s and 8s, you're probably going to end up losing your upper back position a lot more regularly just from systemic fatigue, because your back, it can be slow to recover, as we talked about as well in that front squat video. Front squats are very, very fatiguing. They're kind of similar to back squats. And so anytime we're trying to maintain a really static position with our upper body, and especially if the back is taking a lot of that load, trying to keep that torso upright, and if we're doing that for high reps and we're doing it for lots of sets, and you probably aren't used to high volume front squats, so what's going to happen is we're going to see a lot of fatigue. And while it might be productive, it's not the most kind of efficient and effective way of going about the front squatting progress. So the main difference is we're probably just not going to spend a lot of time doing sets of 10 or 12s like we would in the back squat. We'll spend most of our time in that 6s to 3 range. And then as the program progresses, we're not going to do less volume overall, but what we're probably going to do is we're going to do more sets, but less reps per set, but a similar amount of volume in the latter stages of a back squat program versus a front squat program. So in the front squat program, you know, we might do 10 sets of 3 or 10 sets of 2, whereas in a squatting program you might do, or in a back squat program you might do 4x3 or 5x3. You know, it's going to be pretty similar, but we're going to space it out a little bit different per session. So we might aim for a similar total number of reps at similar percentage of your 1RM on the front squat versus the back squat, but we'll probably split it out over those sets because it's very technical and it's also quite demanding in terms of strength. So we're going to try and maintain our positions really well, but still get a meaningful amount of volume, because even though we want to make sure we're not losing our technical practice, and even though we can't do as much high volume across the weeks or across the session, when we're in those particular brackets of that training program, in that particular block, we still need to get a sufficient amount of volume at those percentages. So instead of doing higher rep sets, we'll do more sets, but a little bit less reps per set. So they're the two main differences. Obviously, the nuance and art of that is a little bit more difficult to write correctly for yourself and predict what you're doing. But that's the main gist of it. So we're not going to do those 10s and 12s. You can if you want, but realistically, you're not going to do them. It's just not productive. You're going to spend a bit more time in that mid-range volume. So you're going to spend a couple of extra weeks doing 5s and 6s, maybe 15 to 20% longer, maybe 2 or 3 weeks longer. And then as the sets go on, we're going to do more sets, less reps, but very similar total volume. Can swimming 1 to 2 times a week be sufficient form of cardio in addition to weightlifting? So the answer to this is yes and no. And I know that's kind of an annoying answer, but it's what is the cardio for? So is the cardio for weightlifting? 2 sessions of swimming a week is definitely loads of cardio for weightlifting. The minimum threshold for your cardiovascular values that you need for the sport of weightlifting is quite low. And if you're doing lots of weightlifting training, you'll kind of brute force your way to that general work capacity. But 2 sessions of swimming for weightlifting would be a huge amount. However, you said in addition to weightlifting, you didn't say for weightlifting. So I'm going to make a guess here and say that you might be using cardiovascular work for long-term health. And the recommendations for cardiovascular work for general health is actually a little bit lower. The amount we think we need to do is actually probably a little bit more. So this might equate to 30, 40 minutes per week. So we actually probably want to be hitting a little bit more than that. You probably want to be hitting somewhere in the region of 4 or 5 hours. So that amount of swimming for your general health probably isn't enough. For weightlifting, it's definitely enough, but for general health, you probably need to be doing a bit more. Does Sika Strength feel overhead pressing is overrated for non-strength sport athletes? So this is a good question, and the answer is I don't feel it's overrated. I feel like it's just not used that much, so I feel like it's appropriately rated. The overhead press is just really limited by the amount of weight most people can use. So if we look at people who use pressing a lot or will need a lot of big upper body pressing, if we look at rugby players, if we look at NFL athletes, American football players, they're going to need big upper body pressing movements. It's going to be resilient, strong movements to offhand people, resist movements. If we maybe look at grappling, judo, for example, heavyweight grapplers, like an 80 kilo strict press is nice. It's a very impressive feat of strength, but what's far more useful is a 140 kilo strict press or 140 kilo bench press or 180 kilo bench press. And like if we talk about the minimum standard we'll use for rugby players, if all but the lightest players in a rugby team, if we're looking for elite international rugby players, we kind of need to be in the region of hitting 170 or 180 pretty easily on the bench press. And if we're not hitting that, if we're not doing that, you're not going to make up that brute force and that upper body strength by strict pressing 90 odd kilos. Now that's not to say lots of strict pressing won't benefit athletes in these places, but by and large, if we need a big pressing movement, if we need strong pressing movements and strong upper body movements for a sport, I've yet to encounter a position where the strict press is the main driver. It can be useful in addition. There's no reason you can't do some extra strict press, but a lot of times mobility is restricted, front rack positions are restricted, they're sore. If you look at rugby players again, you probably have sore shoulders, and that mobility overhead is just going to be super lacking. So in regards to that strict pressing, it's fine. It can be a useful addition for a bit of muscle mass, and it definitely isn't going to take you a lot of time to do. 4 or 5 sets, one session twice a week is going to be reasonably decent, and it's a solid exercise, but I would definitely not be placing it above the bench press for most athletes. It's just hard to get away from the amount of weight you can move on the bench press for sports in general, and especially if that sport is a sport where you're like, you know what? We need big, strong upper bodies here. We're not going to go, let's start doing 50 kilos for 4 sets of 8. We're going to be doing, we can move 120 for 4 sets of 5 now. This is a great start. So you're just going to get so much more bang for your buck and results on the pitch for bench pressing. That's not to say that the upper body benefits aren't there from strict pressing, but it would be bench press first, variations, football bar, cambered bar, anything like that, straight bar, normal bar, anything like that, and then strict press is almost an assistance exercise in those compound movements. What would you recommend to an athlete trying to maximize their vertical jump in regards to their body weight? So basically you're saying, the trade-off between muscle mass, body weight, increasing your vertical jump. And the one I would pick here, and this is, to be honest, is one you could literally do, back squatting. Full depth, high bar back squats. Of every gym lift you're going to do, I think are going to have the most carryover to your vertical jump. There's quite a bit of research on it over the years, and the vertical jump compared to half squats always comes out on top. The full depth squat compared to half squats always comes out on top in comparison to those half squats or quarter squats. Full depth, high bar, as close to ass to grass as you can get is going to be the best movement you can do in the gym for vertical jumping. In fact, I would say if you did nothing else in the gym except for high bar deep squats, that's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. Power cleans can be useful, but look, if you're 80 kilos body weight and you're struggling to squat 100 kilos deep in a good position, 60 kilo power cleans, they're not going to move the needle. What's going to move the needle for you, if you're 80 kilos, you get to 160 kilos, or you get to 200 kilos at 80 kilo body weight, you're going to see massive changes in your vertical jump capacity there. We've lots of very good parkour athletes and free runners for some reason run our squat programs, not for some reason in that obviously the squat program works really well. It's just interesting that they have come our direction over the years, and a lot of them run it 4 or 5 multiple times. We've got quite a few of them to that 2.5 times kilo body weight, and a lot of them report better resiliency but also better jumping capacity. But when it comes to athletes, we're always seeing that the deep squats are the best transference to a very good vertical jump. Even myself, for example, I didn't do any plyometrics for years. After I squatted 300 kilos, which was nearly a triple bodyweight squat, I came back and my jumping was so much better. The first session back when I was jumping, it felt amazing. I've hit lifetime PBs on sprinting and vertical jump, box jumps and vertical jumps purely because that squat. So the number one movement, and to be honest, you could literally just do back squats and progress them. You would see benefits to your vertical jumping. It's so useful for an almost one-to-one transfer. Now, another circumstantial section to that is that more muscle mass gives you a better chance at being more explosive. The more muscle mass you have, the more likely you are to be able to move your frame faster and higher. The more likely you are to have more fast twitch fibers. And as a result, obviously, lower body musculature, incredibly highly related with your potential for jumping. And full range of motion, deep high bar squats are going to nail that coffin for you. Do you think the average technique in weightlifting across international elites has gone down? It feels like coaches aren't as systemic as before. Yes is the answer to this one. I actually do agree with this, but I don't think it's necessarily a neglect problem. If we look globally, weightlifting as an amateur sport is literally more popular by an order of magnitude than it's ever been, literally in weightlifting's history. Weightlifting now is more popular in the amateur scene, in the non-elite, non-paid athlete than it's ever been before, which is fantastic, as evidenced by you guys. Clarence's views. Seb hit like 300,000 subscribers. It's massive. The fact that there's so many people interested in recreational weightlifting is amazing. But on the elite side, we're seeing a lot of those older coaches, those classically trained coaches, those people who quite literally went to university to get a master's in or an undergraduate in coaching weightlifting. A lot of them, sadly, are passing away. They're passing away from age. Some of them aren't involved in sports anymore. The clubs are shut down. If we look at that huge circle of ex-Soviet countries or formerly Soviet countries, the amount of knowledge they had in regards to weightlifting, the amount of research they put into weightlifting, the amount of athletes they had in weightlifting, and the opportunities they had to test things on those athletes. A lot of those coaches are older then. Now they're older still, and some of them are passing away. The funding isn't there for those sports. So I think unfortunately what we're seeing is the elite level in quite a few countries who formerly would have been great is falling off. And unfortunately, getting that knowledge back isn't really that possible. Weightlifting is as much an art as it is a science, and that science is hard enough to get, and learning that art is pretty hard to get. So we're seeing a bit of a regression, certainly. I think 90s was probably peak technique. If we look at 93 worlds, if we look at anything up until Sydney, technical model there, especially in those ex-Soviet countries, was outrageous. And if we look at countries now, the Korean and the German, I think, are leading the way in terms of technical excellence. And Germany, I think, from what I can see, put quite a bit of resources, a reasonable amount of resources into weightlifting, and they certainly have a decent basis of knowledge, and they're very technical and diligent with their programming and their technique, and they're very distinguished about the technical model they want. Korea have a great system, a great grassroots system, a great elite system. Their coaches are super involved. They seem to do a lot of research or take note of that, and it shows in their technical model, a really consistent, solid technical model. The weights might not be the same as in the 80s and 90s, but the technical model is also falling a little bit with that. Now, that's not to say every lifter has worse technique on average than ever, but I think for sure the technical prowess is decreasing, which is a shame, but there's not much we can do about it. What's the best approach when you get sick mid-program, the flu or a cold? Is it best we start at the beginning or pick up where you're left off? So this is largely dependent on the severity of the sickness. So if you were super sick, this might not only mean restarting the program, but it might mean a regression before that program. So if you get explosive diarrhea and you lose 8 kilos and you don't train for 3 weeks and you get back into training, you could be looking at regressing behind the 12-week program. Let's say you're at week 8 of 12. You not only have to go back to week 1, but you probably have to go 2 months back before week 1. However, if it's just a little head cold, a minor flu similar style illness, and you're out for 2 or 3 days, you probably can move on with the next week. You might need to regress 2 weeks as to be safe if you have that time, if there's not a competition coming up or an event. And if you're not like quite literally the week before a max out. So if you're mid-program, like you said, if it's not that severe, if you're not that sick, you can safely regress 2 weeks. And I'd probably recommend that as a default. Just go back 2 weeks just to be sure you're going to cover your bases there and make sure that you're recovered and make sure that you give yourself time. You don't want to overshoot yourself and overestimate how sick you or how recovered you are from the sickness. So if it's not too bad, if you're talking about 2 or 3 days and you're recovered, some people get sick and get recovered quite quickly. So if you're better the day later after a good night's sleep, then I'd recommend at a kind of a maximum, kind of a minimum, go back 2 weeks. Progress from there. You can afford 2 weeks. Far better than to try and take off where you were supposed to be, or just keep going with where you might have been after those 2 or 3 days of training that you took off sick. You're going to mess up the program. You're going to probably be too heavy. You need a little bit of time to acclimatize. So if it's not that bad, go back 2 weeks. Just give yourself a chance. Overshoot that necessary regression. But if it's been really sick, you might need to go back super far. Will the Sika Strength pants be making a comeback? I found them comfy because I lived my pair since I got them. They're starting to grade. Yes, at some point, I promise you they will come back. We're reorganizing company structure here. Hopefully I have a new employee starting soon for administrative and other style work. And we're going to be reassessing what we're doing at Sika Sleep. Currently, all hands are on deck for the app. The app is going really well. We're getting great results. People are liking it, but there's a lot of stuff we need to do, and we only have so much time between trying to make the app better, making content. So the merchandise, while the pants are fantastic, I've multiple pants which are so resilient to training from years ago, and I want new pants as well. And there's some changes I want to make to the pants, largely to the bottom section. They won't be here for a while. Like even getting samples takes like 2 months or something. So I'd like to say next year we will see Sika Pants return, and I'm kind of gunning for that. But there's a lot of work to be done between now and then. So hopefully, if we can get really organized, Sika Pants will definitely be back at some stage. I promise you, we will definitely do them. When? Definitely not this year. Oh, no doubt. I'm going to say maybe spring next year I'd like to aim for. But again, getting time for that depends. How much do I plan to squat when I'm 50? As much as possible. So a user's asking, why do I give absolute heart rate recommendations for zone 2 training? Usually somewhere between 110 and 130. Why don't I recommend people do a lactate test, find out their max heart rate, and then go from there? Because the people we're recommending this to when we're talking about that is just people doing conditioning in addition to their strength training, or they're just trying to get a baseline. So there's a variety of different zones that you could adhere to. There's zones 1 through 7, there's zones 1 through 5, there's zones 1, 2, 3. Whatever one you want to adhere to depends on what you want to do with that. So if you're an athlete and they're trying to train for the Tour de France, we're going to be getting lactate threshold tests, we're going to be doing VO2 max, we're going to get max heart rate, we're going to get all this data. But if someone comes to me and they're a powerlifter and they're a weightlifter and they're like, hey, I need to add in some conditioning because I'm too fat, or I'm not doing any conditioning, or I need to add in some conditioning for the gym so I have a better work capacity, or I want to be a bit healthier, that 3 zone adherence is more than sufficient. We just need to go. Zone 1 is barely walking, you're just walking down the street. Zone 3 is balls out, you're super out of breath. And zone 2 is a place where you're moving pretty quickly, and then you can maintain this for a couple of hours at length. And that's all that we need to describe it. So we don't need it to be super complicated. If a powerlifter comes to me and I go, right, we need to get lactic thresholds. I need to get a finger prick machine. We also might look at blood glucose. I need to get your max heart rate. They're going to go, oh, I just asked this on a live stream. I need to know what am I supposed to do? It's totally different strokes for different folks. So if that powerlifter comes to me and we're like, what conditioning should I do? Or like, look, we're going to aim for something basically zone 2. It's probably going to be somewhere around 110 to 130, maybe a bit later. It's not that important. It's just not your max heart rate, not your resting heart rate. We want to get it into those hundreds and just make sure you can sustain it and talk. So we just need to simplify it as possible. The barrier for entry there in regards to recommendations for conditioning in those scenarios needs to be really low. It needs to be really straightforward because it's going to do what we need it to do. And I just need to make sure that you're trying a little bit, but I also need to make sure that you're not going balls out. That's all that we would do there. If it's a different scenario, if someone's trying to win the indoor rowing championships, we're probably going to look at something different. But, we need to the right prescription with the right terminology for the right scenario. Any advice on keeping strength while losing weight? Yes, absolutely. I have the main priority for you. This is the main thing you should be doing when you're trying to lose weight and keep your strength as much as possible, and that is don't lose more muscle mass than you have to. Your main goal should be stimulating a maintenance of the muscle mass as much as physically possible while you lose fat. You want to orientate your training around preserving that muscle mass as much as possible. So that might mean mostly high rep training. That might mean reducing frequency of your main compound lifts. That might mean a sufficient amount of cardio. That might mean changing to higher intensity cardio. That'll definitely mean super smart nutritional advice and practices, and anything that maintains your muscle mass is so important. And why is this? Because strength training is largely based on several different factors. Some of this is skill, neurological component. One of that is largely based on muscle mass available to you. Now, when we think of strength, we're like, oh, but what about kind of powerlifters and comp maxing, and they're 60 kilos and they can move weights? But if we're talking about non-cheating within the rules strength, if we're talking about full range of motion benching and full range of motion squatting, muscle mass over leverages is really important when we're looking at losing weight. So what we're trying to do here is organize our training around the style that will stimulate as much muscle mass. And what does that usually mean? Well, as much as this might annoy some people, it's going to be higher volume training. Higher volume training is really important for maintenance of muscle mass. It's the most efficient way you can go about doing that. You can't do really heavy sets of failure, especially when you're losing weight. You're going to give yourself a better opportunity if you stick to generally higher volume training. And when we're talking about higher volume training, we're also talking about in the context of you guys watching this. So if you're used to doing 5x5 in the back squat or 5x2 in the snatch, going to 6 sets of 10 is definitely higher volume training. And so this is really well established both clinically, in practice, and theoretically in the literature, is that higher volume training is a really good guarantee of how much mass you will either gain or at least in this scenario maintain. Now, I know we look at sets to failure, reps in reserve, how close to failure you're getting. Are you in the lengthened portion of the lift? Are you in the stretch portion of the lift? But the big thing when we're looking at this from the outside, from performance-based athletes and not physique-based athletes, you'll see that when you look at all of those, the comparisons of how much these different styles of training result in lean mass accrual is minuscule. It is so tiny, it makes no difference for you guys watching this. So when we're looking at that, and people are like, no, that makes no sense. Why are you not training like Mike Mentzer? Or why are you not doing length and stretched with stretch-mediated hypertrophy and reps to failure and then last portion of the stretch section? Because when it comes to the athletes we're dealing with and your guys' goals, none of that makes any difference to you. It's going to make zero meaningful difference to your training. Now, you can do it if you want. There's no real issue there. But when it comes to that, prescriptions are simple, straightforward. Full range of motion training. Focus on the areas you're trying to maintain. So quads, back, shoulders, whatever it is you want to work on. Higher volume. And then generally, if you can, while in your deficit, progress those. So if you can do extra reps 1 week, if you can do extra sets 1 week with the same reps, if you can do the same reps and sets but 2.5 kilos more, then you're getting sufficient form of progression. But when it comes to maintenance of muscle mass, the stimulus you need to maintain muscle mass is way lower than you think. So if we're doing higher volume than we're used to, which is already, compared to our strength training, higher volume, and that strength training was maintaining muscle mass, we're already off to a great start. So maintain that muscle mass is your main goal when you're losing weight. How do you do that? Well, sufficient protein intake, sufficient carbohydrate intake, sufficient fat intake to be healthy, and then higher volume training, generally in isolation movements or non-compound movements, but also some higher volume stuff in your compound movements will see you in a great place by the end of your weight cut. Okay, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please leave a question in the comments below and we will absolutely try and get to it at some stage. I hope you're enjoying these Q&As. Again, as I say, Dara will be joining next week and we'll go from there. So any question you have, leave it in the pinned comment and we'll be delighted to get to it.